Hello and welcome to the latest webinar in the Elemental programme for 2022. Our topic for the hour today, retrofitting heat pumps in commercial buildings. Your chair for the next 60 minutes, my name's Jim McClelland, founder and editor, SustMeme, home to both the magazine and the top 500 rankings. Joining me on the panel this sunny morning are Tim Rippon, climate change specialist at Newcastle City Council, Hannah Davison, assistant project manager, climate change, Northumberland County Council, and Ryan Philp, Green Building Specialist at Daikin UK. It is all live, as you will see, with Q&A to finish. So pop your questions in the appropriately named Ask a Question box, which you'll probably find at the bottom of your screen. Type them in there, you pose them, I'll ask them, they'll answer them. So a little bit about the background to Elemental. This forms part of a programme of panel debates hosted and produced by Elemental, elementaldigital.co.uk. It's the online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. Please note, Elemental's a CPD member, so the good news is all our webinars are now CPD accredited. Full diary of events on the website, range of upcoming webinars, in particular the next one around going clean and green. This week, how innovators are developing new ways to store energy, maximising use of renewables. Very interesting debate, same time this Thursday, 11 a.m. There's also back catalogue, whole host of topics, all available on demand. Who's here, great speakers, and I should add, everything is free to access. So, very brief intro from me because we've got a lot to cover today. Heat pumps, bit of background, probably all know this. Back in November 2020, the then Prime Minister outlined the UK government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, aims to create and support up to 250,000 highly skilled jobs as part of this drive towards net zero by 2050. Point number 7, introduced a target for homes and public buildings, install 600,000 heat pumps every year by 2028. We know this. Very recently, results of a survey conducted by the Heat Pump Association estimate the growth in supply volumes showing manufacturers placed orders for a total of 67,000 units in 2021. Now that is nearly double the number sold in 2019, which was just 35,000, but it does give you an indicator of being a long way to go. Nevertheless, should come as no surprise, heat pumps growing rapidly in popularity. They not only improve the efficiency of energy systems, they can potentially reduce bills by as much as 26%. Fuel bills spiking upwards, therefore as a retrofit option, they can have a crucial role to play in decarbonising commercial buildings, particularly when coupled with renewable energy sources such as solar, which is what we're talking about today. So this session will look at the importance, obviously, of system design, highlight some of the potential challenges, because there are some, for anyone looking to specify heat pump technology in existing buildings. Right, let the debate begin. Enough from me. So we're going to start exploring the crucial role they play in decarbonising commercial buildings. I'm going to ask our panel just to begin by introducing themselves, explaining their perspective, sharing a few opening insights. It's a kind of, who are you? How do you fit into the puzzle? What's the state of play with heat pumps as a non-residential retrofit option? So to kick us off, we have actually 2 local authority viewpoints, both working out the Northeast. Firstly, from the perspective of City Council policy team, Tim, your opening thoughts, please.
Good morning, Jim, and good morning, everyone. So thank you for the invite to be part of this panel discussion. It's a really hot topic at the minute, really interesting topic. We at Newcastle City Council really see a future for air source heat pumps, as well as the wider heat pump market, ground source heat pumps, water source heat pumps, and a range of others. We have around 800 properties that are owned by the City Council itself. And they range everything from a cricket pavilion all the way up to our biggest kind of office block that might be hosting or holding about 500 people or more. So within that, there's a really wide range and diverse range of different building types and different building sizes and uses. So really the challenge for us is, how do we get that building stock, as well as our wider citywide building stock, to net zero? And we think that the heat pump offer is the best and most credible offer on the market at the moment. I will caveat that in a moment, but we think there's a really good opportunity here for heat pumps to play a very crucial role in that transition. But every single one of those buildings is different, as I said, and that's really, really fundamental to how do we design schemes where heat pumps offer the right solution, the right size of heat pump, the right technical solution, the right configuration for them to deliver that low carbon heat in the future. just before I pass on, we also have a number of heat networks in the city, which date right the way back to the 1970s. I think we've got the second oldest heat network, large-scale heat network in the country. And that is a very challenging heat network, but we've got all of that. We've got heat networks from that kind of age all the way through to very modern ones that were built in 2018 to modern standards. And also we think heat pumps will play a crucial role in how we transition those heat networks to a low carbon heating system in the future. Probably pause there, Jim, if that's okay.
No, yeah, very nice intro. Thanks. Yes, as you say, hot topic. Good to mention air, ground and water source heat pumps. No one size fits all solution. You say 800 properties or so, a real mix of assets from cricket pavilions to office space, and nice point about context, heat networks. And of course, this is all part of a broader transition, and locally and regionally, there are different factors in the mix there. So nice. So coming to you, Hannah, also with a climate change remit, but this time project focus and county-wide. What's your take of where we're at the moment, please, Hannah?
Yeah, so just to sort of give a bit of context to my climate change remit is I joined Northumberland County Council over a year ago now as part of a newly expanded climate change team. So we took over the sort of heat pump brief from the commercial energy team, which consisted of a few people, one being my previous manager, Mark Roberts, who led from 2019 the installation of ground source using business cases across about 14 properties within our estate. So I'm relatively new to this. Heat pumps are obviously a great viable technology. I think they're especially good for us in Northumberland. So we have lots of land to do things such as ground source. In particular, sort of our rural schools that were previously on oil systems, they're a great solution for that. In terms of air source, that's probably more of our domestic side, which my colleague leads on. So I cover only the commercial decarbonisation of heat, and my other colleague Rachel Jones covers the domestic decarbonisation of heat, which obviously falls under the LAD, HUG, warmer home schemes that we roll out. Given that it is county-wide, as great as it is being rural and having space to do ground source, it's also extremely difficult. You know, you're managing what previously were a lot of different local councils that have sort of been accumulated into one. So I'm managing schools from up on the Scottish borders in Berwick and trying to assess their energy needs all the way down to the border against North Tyneside. So the fact that at current we can only really do about 3 schools every summer when the children aren't there and we can retrofit is probably the biggest barrier for us. But it's something that we're just having to be a bit more strategic about, and might be seen as being a bit more slow now, but I think slow and careful is the better approach to nail this right.
Excellent. Some nice points made there. So good to hear that you're part of an expanding climate change team, because one would imagine that's the way to go. And the fact you're in the post you're in obviously suggests the direction of travel in Northumberland, which is good. Nice point, of course, that rural properties and locations, and some of those bring different challenges and difficulties. And of course, it's easy to assume that it's all about a variety of properties. But as you pointed out, these properties have fallen under the remit of different local authorities potentially. And so it's not just the building, it's also how they've been managed or potentially funded, or what the priorities were in that particular location. And as you rightly say, you're having to be strategic, but 3 schools a summer does give us a reality check as to how fast, in your case, it is possible to go at the moment. So a good candid exchange there in terms of where we're at. So then, Ryan, coming to you. So this opening round, solutions provider side of things. Obviously, we know heat pumps, hot topic in residential, but talk to me about what about public and commercial buildings, Ryan?
Morning all. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me as well. It's a really interesting discussion. Working for Daikin, we're globally one of the biggest HVAC manufacturers out there. So when we talk about heat pumps, what is really interesting is whether you talk about air source or ground source. In commercial spaces, heat pumps have existed in commercial buildings for a long time, but predominantly they've been air-to-air systems, so air conditioning systems, which often have a bit of a black mark associated to them in terms of public domain and what people think about air conditioning. But it's It's the same technology, same principles of what we're talking about. It is a heat pump. We're just talking about different mediums, whether we're doing air to air or air to water. So heat pumps have been in commercial spaces for a long time, but predominantly that's because there's been such a high kind of cooling demand. So there's been air conditioning systems, as we've seen, as you know, as you highlighted with the government's net zero plan and the 10-point strategy to achieve that. Rollouts of various funding schemes, such as a public sector decarbonisation scheme, has been a really kind of interesting one, which has driven designers, specifiers, and contractors, and property management and real estate companies away from high carbon, high temperature fossil fuel heating systems towards low carbon and often low temperature heating systems such as heat pumps. So what we're seeing now is kind of a shift in. It's still the same technology being used, but it's kind of the purpose of it is now changing. So as opposed to a heat pump being put in just for cooling, heat pumps are now going in for the heating requirements and also the hot water requirements. So there's definitely a change in demand and expectations of what these units need to do from a commercial perspective. On the residential side, it's predominantly in the UK, always been heating, always been hot water. That's always going to be the requirement. If anything, we might in the future see actually a shift where the heat pumps need to do cooling as well, as we have a change in climate. So commercial and domestic, different opposing sides of the spectrum, but the technology is still applicable. Most heat pumps on the market are reversible or can quite easily come as reversible. Manufacturers offer a wide range, but we could be talking like large capacity, kind of like from a couple of 100 kilowatts up to a few megawatt, like chillers for data centers, for example, all the way down to kind of your a few kilowatts up to a few hundred kilowatts. Reversible heat pumps, 4-pipe heat pumps, or VRV and VRF. These are all heat pumps of different configurations. There's a huge market out there, and we're definitely seeing increase growth potential, but like you've highlighted, probably from the residential side, there's much more growth opportunity from air to water heat pumps, just because previously the market has been so small. But in the UK, huge market, it's a mature market in which people are operating already.
Excellent. So yeah, nice commercial perspective there. And as you say, although in a sense the impetus is relatively new, the technology isn't necessarily. It has been around in one form or another. Obviously now public sector decarbonisation drive, you're saying a change in demand, growth opportunity. Nice point made there. Low carbon, low temperature, and of course low energy. Danger of assuming that the energy, temperature, and carbon metrics are one and the same, and of course they're not. And a point, of course, about the technology being reversible. So we're through the. I already see actually we have a nice question. It's good to see already. Is it Steve Young has already popped a question in the bottom there? So you'll be on your mettle later, panel, because they're already wanting to ask you things. So in this middle section then, so thanks for the intros. I call this challenges and conflicts, and the clue's in the name really. We wouldn't be having this debate if everything was running smoothly and we were ahead of target and it was easy. As Hannah said, it isn't necessarily easy. So real world, I want to get into the difficult stuff in this middle section. What are the barriers to the rollout of heat pumps? Why is retrofit difficult? Is it policy, tech, skills, cost? What needs to happen to get more specifiers and installers to get the system design and retrofit right so everyone wins? So this is the most spiky bit of things. So I'm going to start with you, Hannah. You'll be pleased to hear. So you've got a target to make Northumberland net zero by 2030. The council itself, I think, even sooner, by 2025. Your work installing heat pumps, like so think of the Riverside Centre, Stakeford Depot, estimated likely to save hundreds of thousands of pounds in running costs, even before the current fuel crisis. All good. Thumbs up, all right. Yet, we've also seen stories about legacy planning rules hampering progress and the council themselves failing to get approval for school projects, apparently. So my challenge to you is, are you doing enough fast enough to accelerate the retrofit programme at project level, Hannah?
Yeah, so I think I touched on this in my earlier answer. I was saying, 3 schools per summer. I don't think that's fast enough given how many schools that Northumberland County Council has. And with regards to the sort of planning side of things, I'm not 100% sure on the approval for school projects, and it might predate my start at Northumberland County Council. But obviously from the public sector decarbonisation first phase, I do have some experience throughout the planning process because it was putting in more than one heat pump into the leisure centre annex. that did come up. It just sort of got a bit delayed through the process, but that was resolved quite easily, and it was just sort of communicating clearly the designs around the housing of the heat pumps that would provide the noise attenuation. And that was all it was, really. You know, there was no sort of reason for the objection besides just the noise level, which was perfectly attenuated by the designs that the contractors put out. And aside from that, just sort of on a climate strategy level, we've started engaging a lot more with the planning team, having joint sort of policy sessions. I believe we'll have at least a monthly catch up every now and then just to talk about projects coming down the pipeline, so we can sort of anticipate what we need to navigate the planning process best, which I think has really improved not just the climate team's work, but that cross-departmental work. And I would say in terms of accelerating the project, from what I've found in, you know, my year or so here, some of the biggest barriers for us are really identifying buildings that qualify for public sector decarbonisation funding. If you think of, you know, the hundreds of heating systems that we have overview on, the criteria for PSDS being an end-of-life boiler, the buildings that you necessarily want to decarbonise because they're your, so say, highest emitters, which for us are obviously our leisure centres, don't necessarily match up with those funding stipulations. So they'll have boilers that are quite relatively new. So for us, it's quite hard because you're only able to do funded work on properties with old systems. But that might be, you know, say a school, a very small school in a very rural area that doesn't really contribute much to our emissions. So from a climate perspective, it is quite hard. I'd also sort of say, with regards to the funding windows with PSDS, I think 1 year is extremely difficult. Obviously, navigating planning is a lot easier now. We're more engaged in that process, but there's also other things, you know, asking whoever the user of the building is. As a council, we own the building, but we're not necessarily whoever occupies it. Navigating with them their energy use, whether they're engaged with the process. So we've had great success installing ground source heat pumps across our fire stations because they're really keen and engaged. As you can imagine, the fire service are at the front line dealing with climate related events such as flooding in Morpeth, wildfires across the county. And they've been really receptive to that. It's not as disruptive to them as it would be to a school where we're only able to do works during the summer period. So it's that sort of massive estate-wide look to find and nail down the projects. Trying to look ahead is quite hard because at the minute, I believe it's quite a reactive basis that maintenance is done on. So when, say, a boiler comes to its end of life, the most viable solution is often just to replace it because the council have the expertise to do that. We don't have anyone in-house who can advise us on a heat pump design, be it air source or ground source. And for us to then sort of stick our foot in as the climate team and start lecturing them on, oh, you need to go for the lowest carbon option. It's actually quite difficult. And it's often come out that, you know, the most straightforward option after we've had it assessed by consultants is just a gas connection or a new gas boiler, because the retrofit required to do heat pumps in some of our older properties is quite extensive and the business case falls down, unfortunately. I would say another sort of aspect is if there were, say, more weight towards energy efficiency measures in funding routes, we would lead with that and then go for a mass sort of rollout of a low carbon heating technology. But because there's not an emphasis on the fabric first approach and the funding sort of doesn't weigh under that, at the minute you're installing larger heat pumps than are required in buildings because you're not leading with the fabric first energy reduction, which should be key in the energy hierarchy. So for me, that's something that I find quite hard to navigate, and I think it requires a lot more to be asked of BEIS and central government. And it's something that I've been raising through the heat networks discussions we're having as well, because we're on the feasibility track for that as well through the HNDU. Obviously, a lot of our heat networks that we'll be looking at will be heat pumps as well. But something that doesn't quite line up with the climate point of view is for a heat network, there is no desire for fabric first energy reduction, because then you reduce your linear heat density. Say if you had a row of houses, you want them to be using more energy because then it makes your financial stack up better. Whereas from a climate perspective, you want them to be using less energy, but then it's less viable for the heat network. So there's that lack of sort of joined up strategy that I find as sort of a worker in a local authority extremely difficult to navigate, because I'm hearing conflicting things on heat pumps, air source, ground source. I'm not getting as much support and guidance from central government as I would like to be. And then all I'm seeing in my project work day to day is sort of failed funding bids, projects that could have gone on but haven't been able to progress because of that. And it's really difficult, I'd say. And as much as we'd love to put heat pump in every building where it's viable, at the minute it's just physically impossible. And we can't sort of say for certain when government will help us to do that. Or again, so sorry for going on, another example is government have said they want by 2050 20% of buildings to be on a heat network. As Northumberland is extremely rural, we're probably is going to be overlooked there and not counted in that 20%. Yet they've not provided what the other 80% should be. At the minute, the counterfactual for a heat network is an air source heat pump. But we've looked at properties in our Blythe area where that's not a viable option. So they've not sort of said, and that's where maybe alternative options such as hydrogen come in, but there's no guidance. We have no expertise on that. So we're kind of left stranded. Yeah, sorry to be so negative.
No, that's, to be honest, this is exactly what we're wanting to talk about in the middle section of this, because this is a reality. These are the challenges. As you say, I mean, obviously you've got a statewide perspective. You made a nice point about the fact that some of the planning issues could be resolved, say around noise or when you're putting in more than one heat pump, etc. But it's more, say, complexities of funding that you're wrestling with, some conflicting drivers, a lack of joined up thinking and doing, and it is a team game, whether that's cross-departmental working, as you mentioned, or working regionally, locally, and with central government, or across your geographic area, or with the occupiers, or whatever those different stakeholders and parties might be. To get this sense of momentum, there needs to be more of a team approach. But and you also pointed out, of course, there are some groups that are very positive, such as fire stations. Now, I know you're only doing 3 schools at a time, but sometimes with sustainable technologies, the more you get done, the more case studies there are, the more it de-risks and gets over some of those perception barriers, and they can see it working somewhere else. Light at the end of are you seeing any little glimmer of momentum getting going in that the more you do, the more you've done, the more you can point to the success, the more it's replicable somewhere else? I know they're not identical. Is there any sense of that momentum, or is it too sporadic as yet, Hannah?
Yeah, we do have some sense of it. So we're looking to hold a sort of educational event at one of our schools that we've just recently completed installation on, just because we think it would be quite a nice event for the children to get involved and to understand why we sort of ripped all the radiators out of their school and put in this new shed with this weird machine that they obviously, it doesn't look interesting, but it's something that, as again, part of our climate engagement strategy is to sort of go out more and talk to residents, school children, and get climate higher up the agenda and sort of explain to them what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Cool. That's a nice point, because communication in every sense is critical to onboarding some of the people you need and getting some of that sentiment going. So, right, we're right into it now then. So, Ryan, if I'm coming to you in this conflicts and challenges bit. So, heat pumps are not exactly fit and forget technology. As we said, there's no simple one size fits all. You need the right system design, performance optimization, maintenance, etc. On top of it, retrofit, own bundle of existing issues, complexities, historic elements, you name it, added into the mix. So, Ryan, how do you de-risk this whole process for commercial and civic clients? And can they be confident not only will the technology work, but the skills are available to specify and complete it in such a way that the retrofit basically does what it promised? You know, it actually delivers the upgrade on car and cuts carbon and bills. So how do you de-risk it, and how do you reassure people that you've got the skills and the capacity to deliver on these big promises, Ryan?
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? There's a shift in the market for sure. So as people are becoming, across all different sectors and industries, members of the public and professionals, etc., everyone's becoming more climate conscious and climate aware. People are already moving towards technologies such as heat pumps. You don't need a majority of buildings, or you don't need a majority of a group to do something for there to be change. You just need a high minority, and then you start to see the growth in that space. So kind of as Hannah just mentioned there's a couple of key points, case studies, things like this. Imperial College London released a briefing paper just last month, I think, looking at how to kind of transition and grow and develop the heat pump market. And a big factor, a big element of that, as we're talking about technology, which previously, especially on a domestic sense, has had such bad press and people are very kind of unsure about it. It's peer-to-peer learning is such a key element. So these kind of panel discussions really help, and case studies, all of those kind of great examples, the opportunity to utilize the medium of the new forms of communication, YouTube, social media, all of these things expand across all different platforms so that we can create a source of credible information. I think that's one of the hard things that we have moving forwards is or two key things really is one is definitely education, and it's about how do you make sure everyone is on the right path, but also getting credible information, not just from a manufacturer who absolutely loves their products, but from for example, someone who's an expert within those product ranges, but can speak holistically about all of the products available within that space and how to integrate them all together, etc. So the biggest issue I think with communication moving forwards, or the biggest barrier / opportunity is taking a systems approach to retrofit. So also, as Hannah mentioned, fabric first is absolutely vital with this. And I think there's so many experts within the industry who understand we can't and shouldn't just take out a boiler and put in a heat pump. But unfortunately, for various different reasons, such as the financial element of what funding is available, behavioural changes needed, etc., many people are saying, well, we'll take this boiler out and just put in a high temperature air source heat pump. It may not be the most efficient, it may not be the most cost effective long term, but it's the replacement we need, and it does bring down the carbon straight away by a significant chunk. Long term, it's not a scalable, sustainable solution. We definitely need deep retrofit, and the communication element that I think is needed there is this shift of narrative away from just fabric or just heat pumps or whatever the product or solution may be, towards a whole. How can we change the behaviour and usage patterns of this building so people are becoming more energy aware? Irrelevant of our government saying they don't want to be a nanny state and tell people how to use their energy. There's definitely an opportunity, I think, or a need to educate people about how to use energy. Whether or not they follow those rules, who knows? But definitely there's an opportunity there for behaviour change, and then the holistic systems thinking approach to retrofit, deep retrofit, and move towards circular economy. So yes, heat pumps are absolutely fantastic at reducing your operational carbon emissions, but we need to focus on whole life carbon. So that's looking at the built environment as a materials bank, seeing how much material, be it product, be it steel, concrete, flooring, ductwork, whatever, how much can be reused, and that's going to push demand onto manufacturers to make sure they're driving innovation within the space of business models that have take back and recycling schemes. So, and you see some of that going on already, but it's definitely going to grow. But that's a huge challenge, is to change the industry perspective of how do we change and create low carbon is definitely needed. But if we just move towards low carbon technologies, what we need, the issue is we're going to continue with the practices we're already doing, wasting energy, not necessarily running things in an efficient way. Whereas if we try to take a holistic mindset and move towards low carbon, but in an overarching way, then we can move towards circularity, reduce waste, etc. The other side is definitely skills and the workforce of engineers available to kind of actually install, install these products and carry out maintenance, etc. on these products and technologies. But also people who are going to be well-versed engineers or technically minded, so that, or however, problem solvers, maybe get rid of labels of what these people need to be, but workers who are able to look at a technology and understand how it can integrate as part of a whole building, as opposed to someone who maybe just previously would just put a boiler in, and they're very good at putting boilers in, but weren't maybe very good at maintaining boilers or understanding efficiency of boilers. They're very good at putting them in. So we need to try to upskill a workforce there when it comes to kind of the installation and the retrofit side of things, and diversify that workforce. Try to encourage new talent to come in. move away from a generic standard of what we think engineers should look like, and really open up the opportunity for this space. There's a really good podcast where people spoke about it was Joe Alsop and Leah Robinson on the Zero Ambition podcast, who spoke really highly about the move to, maybe we can rephrase and rename what we call this. It's like they could be climate champions, whatever you want to do. Encourage new young people into this space, because it's a really exciting space. The built environment has such a big part to play in decarbonisation and the path towards net zero. So, but yeah, there's lots of the education side. Sorry to go on, just a really last point. Piece. The education side is a challenge, but you know, the webinars that you guys have been on at Elementa, it's one of the key parts to kind of help drive this information change. Beta Talks, Beta Teach, Zero Ambition podcast. Arup are doing breakfast webinars and meetings with loads of people. So there's lots of kind of platforms available where people can get reliable kind of sources of information and education. So I think that's definitely the way to go. It's just, obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time because people generally don't like change.
Excellent. So yeah, a good discussion then of the challenges, but also some of the positive potential solutions and routes forward. So as you mentioned, be it early adopters or case studies, briefing papers, still a challenge getting the word out there, potentially on social and the like, and there's an education piece to be done, and communication has to be credible. But then you also moved on nice to talk about systems or systemic approach, even fabric first and beyond, to deep retrofit and whole life carbon. Also, the elephant in the room, behaviour change. Clearly, with the fuel crisis, there'll be a lot of vulnerable people who have no choices and no options. And they're going to face a very tough time. But there are some others, and especially maybe commercial clients, who do have options and choices and could make better and smarter decisions. So maybe some of the spike in prices will encourage them to review some of the behaviours and some of their existing practices. Maybe. Yeah, that's an optimistic view on that. So Tim, finally in the challenges and conflicts, we've already got a bunch of questions, so I'm going to rattle along a bit now. But Tim, so I think I've got this right. Last year, City was awarded 27 million from the government fund to install low carbon heating and other measures. Just secured a further 1.6 million towards eco-friendly options in public buildings. Sounds great. Well done. But the year is 2022. So my challenge to you is, how come the City is only just beginning some of this work now? The business case is so good for retrofitting heat pumps to energy inefficient buildings. Why is it taking you so long to take climate action and decarbonise your property assets? So, are you late to the party? And if so, why, Tim? That's my challenge.
Jim, okay, so no, we're not late to the party. Just to cover that one off from the outset, no, we're not late to the party. In fact, I'd probably say we're right at the pointy end of this transition in the UK market at the minute. We spent 27 million in just over a year and a half, let's say, to be generous. And we've managed to put heat pumps into, we started top down. We put heat pumps into our biggest buildings. They were using typically 1 million kilowatt hours of gas or more every year, sum them up to 6 or 7 million kilowatt hours. So pretty big heat loads, pretty big gas consumers, pretty big environmental impact of all of that. So we wanted to start top down and really make a big inroad into like our big headquarters, our biggest academies in the city, that kind of thing. It's been a phenomenal lesson. It's been a roller coaster with all the challenges we've had to go through, but it's been really eye-opening as to the lessons. And I think to answer the second part of your question, I'd say everything. I'm going to risk sounding a bit like a free market economist here, but I think cost is absolutely king in this equation. What we're effectively saying is we want the market to spend a massive amount of capital, eye-watering sums of capital, to deploy brand new low carbon heating systems into buildings that already have heating systems that are fully functional and working and operating reasonably well, maybe vary in quality, but reasonably well. And we want you to pay all that money up front. And by the way, we're going to use electricity, which is 3, 4, 5 times the cost of gas to run those systems. That's the fundamental. How the heck do we get the market to say we will spend a load of capital and the system we're going to install is going to be even more expensive? So yes, we've got PSDS giving us grant sums at the moment. We've got other funds that can potentially take the edge off that cost equation. But really the fundamental here is these things are very, very expensive. Heat pumps are very, very expensive to install. The units themselves aren't necessarily the most expensive element of the install cost, but all the design costs, design costs for a big building typically can be 100 to 200 grand from getting from REBA 1 through to REBA 5. The cost of the heat pumps themselves, they're not cheap, but they're not overly expensive on a per kilowatt basis, comparable to a boiler. But the cost of all of the installation of that equipment into the plant room, all of the connections to the low loss headers, all of the BMS systems, the new electrical panels, the new pipework runs you might have to do, the new emitters, you might have to reconfigure the operation of the whole system. And you've often got to do that in a retrofit market when you've got a building occupant who's still there. And at the end of it, what you've really got to do is say, with all of that cost, which is a lot, how do you make this scheme wash its face? And the only way you make it wash its face is if the operational cost justifies all of the pain and all of the cost at the front end for that capital. And that's a big ticket item for us. It's getting confidence around the performance of the heat pump. So if they're going to deliver, there's a big difference between a heat pump for the next 15 or 20 years operating on a 2.5 coefficient of performance and a 4.5 coefficient of performance. And we hit everything in that range. We get people come to us and say, we can give you a heat pump that will give you 4.5, even an air source heat pump. And we take it with a pinch of salt. But we've got to really be able to hang our hat on these numbers, because we're in a market where cost of capital is going up, inflation is going up, interest rates are going up, cost of borrowing is going up. So all of that, those different uncertainties on top of the energy prices changing rapidly, is far too much uncertainty to be able to then take big risks with what is a big capital sum in year one that's going to be recovered over a 15-20 year cash flow. Right. So that's probably where I'd say the main issue is, and that's where the market, I think there's a market gap there at the minute for the providers of this technology to actually warrant and guarantee the performance of that technology.
Excellent. That's a really nice, honest appraisal, and it's prompting plenty of chat and questions. So we'll be getting to that. You'll be pleased to hear. So, yeah, obviously, I mean, Newcastle City are in the vanguard of what's possible, which is exactly why we're speaking with you today. So I'm happy that you talked about the big wins first, tackling some of those 1 million kilowatt hour properties, etc. Lessons though, cost is king. Obviously, you're talking capital upfront, and nice point about the fact the expense includes things other than just the kit, so design costs and things like that. And some of those, of course, in terms of cost differentials, although mainstreaming might mean some of the kit costs are getting more competitive, some of those other factors you mentioned aren't necessarily. And we all understand in the UK at the minute now the importance of getting budgets right and managing to do your sums in such a way as to reassure the market and keep everybody's confidence high. So it's challenging times, and we're getting plenty of questions now. So thank you for that. Now, right, I'm going to be very quick with my last round then, because we've already got 5 questions, we've got a bunch of comments, so we're going to rattle through. So unlike the last round, which was challenges and conflicts, lastly, I'm just going to give you 1 or 2 minutes each. So a real quick answer. Reasons to be cheerful. So we've done the gloomy bit, but let's imagine successful, sustainable, the rollout's going, great guns, fitting them everywhere. You're getting around it. Let's just imagine rose-tinted spectacles on that it is working in the best way possible. We're decarbonising, councils are saving money, green jobs are being created, net zero targets. So give us a quick couple of lines. First, Ryan, then solutions provider. Paint us a picture of the market opportunity if things were to go brilliantly. What could you hope to do in this space?
Yeah, definitely. It's a really nice thing to think about, isn't it? Because that's kind of what we're all trying to work towards. And the things that I get excited thinking about when talking about heat pumps and air conditioning, which is pretty much everything, but in the future, is focusing on energy. It's twofold, really. It's focusing on reducing waste. So kind of as I spoke about before, circularity, and I've seen a comment just come in about HFCs and, GWPs of refrigerant. So reducing that, becoming more environmentally friendly. But the energy efficiency side is what gets really exciting, because when you start talking about heat pumps of commercial buildings, you talk about residential, you can talk about retrofit at large scale, and as has been spoken about by the other panelists, heat networks and that opportunity for smart grids and smart management. We've got smartphones, we've got smart cars, we've got smart buildings are going to be a thing, as well as smart cities, and you need electrification to unlock that. So that for me is the greatest potential. Sure, in the short term, people are going to have at home, batteries and thermal batteries, etc. But energy batteries, they'll get to a point, hopefully in a not too distant future, but part of a net zero pathway, where batteries aren't required, because we've got complete balancing across the UK in terms of our energy demand and energy usage. So that for me is a really exciting time where I think there's great amount of innovation to come there.
Excellent, nice positive there. So the smart future is the game-changing one. So then, Tim, coming to you now. Ryan's passing you those rose-tinted spectacles if you pop them on for a minute. So, heat pumps in commercial public buildings, not just residential. Sell us the future vision for Newcastle, world-leading, clean, green, electric city. Give us the promo pitch now, Tim.
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, you have to hope, right, that we can transition from where we are today into a low carbon future. And I think this is the fundamental. This is a key technology in that transition in various configurations, whether it's individual properties or it's in heat networks. Heat pumps have got to be an absolute integral part of that. And as I think Ryan said at the beginning, they're a mature technology. They've installed millions of them worldwide. They're a well-known product. They're really well understood in the market across the world. So I think, we benefit in this transition from having a mature technology that we know how it will perform. There will be incremental improvements in that technology, and we need to see how these will perform, improve performance over time. But fundamentally, I do think that heat pumps are the biggest element of this transition, and they're the one that can give us the most potential. But we've got to move from a point where heat pumps at the moment are maybe a kind of peripheral. They're only a very small fraction of the installs year on year in the country. And in this retrofit market, they are very challenging to integrate into existing building stock. There has got to be something that fundamentally shifts here and now in order to move that market. My perspective, humble perspective on this, is that's got to be driven by market economics. That's got to be driven by price point, and it's got to be driven by how much the operating of these systems can save you, that will then justify spending the capital here and now. So it's an economics case, is what I'm saying.
Great, yeah. So there is potential, definitely, as you say, to make that big transformative shift into mainstreaming. We're going to need a kind of economic piece, and we're going to need some levers for that kind of real transition to happen. So I see we've just lost Hannah temporarily, it seems. So I shall jump now. I think hopefully she'll join us again in a moment, but let's try and take some questions, and hopefully Hannah will be back with us in a moment, and we have plenty of them. So let's scrolling up and down here. So I think there's one definitely. So Ryan, there's one in here. It says from Fred J. Edwards. Ryan, noise. Local authority requirements are complex, high bar, retrofit builds, very low background noise, boiler flues silent, acoustic attenuation. You can see quite a detailed technical question. Why don't Daikin et al. Work on noise cancelling tech? So you can see there's a lengthy question there from Fred. Fundamentally, it's the noise issue, Ryan. Where are you on that? And why aren't you doing more, he's suggesting, to address some of those technical challenges listed in his question?
It's a really good question. It's looking at local planning in specific countries versus the wider scale. Working for a global manufacturer, at the moment, we don't manufacture our heat pumps in the UK. So Daikin UK work for Daikin Europe. Daikin Europe, we've got factories all across Europe where we manufacture these products. So we have to manufacture and build products and design products which are suitable for mass markets. Definitely there will be opportunities, hopefully in the not too distant future, where there'll be more manufacturing facilities by different manufacturers opening up in the UK, and then you'll have more development in that space where products are made specifically for the regions where they're being installed. Noise is such a big thing. And also it's the cost of the acoustic enclosures, but often it's also then the space of them, because they end up being quite big. So it's a huge thing that we need to get around. But then arguably, if there's the opportunity for it, maybe that's when we start looking towards water source heat pumps or heat networks. Because if external space, because you're in residential areas or whatever the reason may be, sometimes heat pumps, they can be some of the constraints. But also I would say, long term, I would like sound to be an area where there's improvements in planning policy, because I would argue it's very strict, maybe too strict.
Excellent. So call for some if not leeway, then at least some progress in terms of sound. And now While I've got you there, Ryan, take another one. So a question for Daikin's coming from someone called Thomas. It says, commercial projects, I wonder if you could just highlight some of the common issues with design consultants when they try to integrate heat pump into an existing building, for example, particular valves required, not supplied to your unit, etc., minimum flow rate. So what are the kind of crunch design issues that you're typically coming across with retrofits?
It's a really good question. It kind of goes back to what I was highlighting before, is if you're just installing a heat pump but not changing any of the internal services, makeup of the building, etc., then you're going to have quite a few constraints there, because you're trying to basically make a, dependent upon the heat pump you use, but a lot of people are moving towards low temperature heat pumps. If you're going to try to install a low temp heat pump into an old leaky building which has a high temperature heating system, by high temperature I mean the flow water temperature going around the building is like 70-80 degrees, and you're trying to move that water around via a heat pump at kind of 40-50 degrees, there's going to be some huge technological and design constraints there in terms of how it's going to work. Definitely there's valves, pump kits, hydraulic separation, etc., that can be included. It then becomes a really intricate conversation between the manufacturer and the specifier to make sure the specifier knows how to design heating systems, especially wet systems that we're talking about. And the manufacturer's given the correct guidance available. That also comes down to resources. Some manufacturers have that ability to do it basically because they've got the time to do it, they've got the knowledge in-house, some don't. So for sure it's about having that conversation. But the move that we have to have moving forwards is having that systems thinking approach to say, if we are going to do a retrofit, is it worth doing it now because the heating system is broken, so we need to change it? Or are we able to wait until there's enough finances available to do a kind of a deep retrofit where we can change some of the heating system? I would say just a quick side note, a behavioural change worth considering is looking at your current heating system, if it's like a boiler, CHP, etc., lowering the flow temperature. If you're at 70-80, bring it down to 60-70, for example. As in, there'll still be a delta T of like 20-30 degrees, but drop that flow temperature down by 5 or 10 degrees. Just test, you'll save energy, you'll save carbon. Likelihood is the tenants and occupants won't actually realise any difference in terms of the output.
Cool. Lots of nice pointers there. Welcome back, Hannah. And a call for a systems-wide approach. So I'll give you a moment. I'll throw a couple of questions Tim's way. There's one at the second question I think we're looking at here from Steve Young. Asking, should funding for decarbonisation of heating be predicated on the building meeting acceptable performance in terms of fabric operation and maintenance? Sticking an air source heat pump in a building, poor insulation is wasted investment. So if you hold that one, Tim, so there's one, should it be predicated on performance more broadly? And there was one further down from Rick saying they may be expensive to install, but surely the point is if designed correctly, they'll save not only carbon, but running costs as well. So I know you touched on some of this, but I wonder if you could pick those two up first. So should you be required to prove that the building as a whole is going to perform and you're not just sticking kit in something that's basically full of holes? And are you going to get the payback over time?
Okay, so point one, absolutely, yes, you need to do fabric improvements, fabric first, to a degree. Now, fabric first gets banned around as a term and people seem to think that it has an endless potential. It very rapidly gets a law of diminishing returns. So if you're going to put secondary glazing in a building, great, it will probably give you a pretty good improvement in your U values and it'll probably reduce your peak heat loss in the building. If you're talking about putting triple glazing in let's say a listed building, yes, you'll get a U value bump. Does it actually save you money? No. And there is something to be said for Steve's comment here about setting a kind of threshold which is acceptable before you start coming along and installing heat pumps on the peak heat loss of the building. I'd agree with that, except noting that there are buildings and there are buildings, and some buildings are built in 2015, 2016 to modern building reg 2013 standards, and they perform very differently to our Victorian buildings. And we've got everything in between. And some of the buildings with the best will in the world, you could throw money at them, but there'd still be a leaky bucket. So you could set a standard and you might never actually achieve it. Does it mean we leave that building to a high carbon future?
Yep.
Does it mean we demolish it if it's got a listed building or it's in a conservation area or any number of other considerations? No, it doesn't. We've still got to find a solution, even if it doesn't give us a 3 or a 3.5 coefficient of performance. Even if the coefficient of performance drops below 2, for example, we may have to take that view. On the second point, no, buildings don't always give you cash flow savings operationally. If you install a heat pump, often they don't. We've run cash flows for, I must run cash flows for about 40 buildings and several different scenarios. I must have run more cash flows than I've had hot dinners in the last year, looking at various scenarios. They don't always save you money. Sometimes they do. Funnily enough, the ones that did perform best for us were the pools, because they were effectively a big body of water, and you had your evaporative heat loss, and that was a main source of heat loss. But the heat pumps really work really well with a swimming pool, because it's just like a big thermal store.
Yep.
And you just keep a really steady flow of heat going into that building. But then we've had other ones at the other end of the scale where no matter what we do, we cannot get the cash flows to give us any savings, and actually they end up costing us millions over a 20 or 30 year term. That was all before we had loads of variance in the energy price. Gas price started going up by 200-300%. The electricity price is going up 30-40-50%. You're trying to balance all of these sort of variable elements in a cash flow. Doesn't work very well. It's very tricky to do.
Excellent. Good point about the broad spectrum of buildings in your portfolio, real mix of assets, and you need a fairly flexible and intelligent response across that whole portfolio in terms of expected performance, because some of it has to be obviously realistic and in proportion to the property concerned. I think if I just throw one more before we go to Hannah, I think this is meant for you, Tim. Mentioned REBA 1 to 5, really learned from REBA 7. Practicing architect here, Stefan Heist, saying lessons learned. What's preventing you going all the way to REBA 7? Brian touched on it.
No, we do REBA 7.
Can't you hang your hat on that? You are.
No, we do. Okay, it's maybe not completely aligned with REBA 7, but we do monitoring and verification. We do hydraulic optimization and digital twins of how the system's expected to perform. And then we are going to be benchmarking. We're only just a few months into the operation of these heat pumps, and we haven't been through a heating season yet, but we will be very closely monitoring how do we optimize their performance, how do we compare them against our digital twin modeling and the outputs of that, which a lot of it's done with Pareto analysis or statistical modeling. And then we'll be looking at a kind of ongoing monitoring and verification plan. So I'm not sure it exactly aligns to REBA 7, but the concept is very much, let's get the operation of these systems right. Let's get the O&M, the maintenance aspects of that right. And let's make sure we optimize as we go forward and we get the set points right, the operating hours right, the flow temperatures right, the return temperatures right. Everything has to be operating slickly before we're comfortable that we're operating that building to the best that it can be.
Excellent. Nice point there, because in some cases, although this isn't new, literally we haven't been through a whole year or enough seasons or a tough winter, or in some cases the data and statistical modeling is relatively immature or relatively skinny. So it is a learning process. So Hannah now, question especially for you from Salvatore Zingali. He's asking, in terms of, you talked about the viability issues, is it commercial or financial? Is it a procurement thing, policy constraint, or is it technical or technology? What especially, or what typically is your viability issue, or all of the above?
Yeah, I'm going to say a mix of the above. Just sort of in terms of, I wouldn't say policy so much a barrier. Obviously, we declared a climate emergency in 2019 with the full support of the leader of the council, and we've been rolling out schemes such as carbon literacy training across departments, and so we're definitely increasing our sort of visibility as a team and building those connections with, say, estates, property services, the energy team, planning and procurement, and really getting it on the radar what sort of potential projects will be coming up. I'd say technical on my end, as I am sort of the one project officer working on these PSDS bids at the minute, is just the sort of lack of expertise within local authorities on heat pumps. I've got mechanical engineers in the property team who can advise me on a boiler to be installed perfectly well. You can give me costs, you can give me times. I don't have anyone like that for heat pumps. I then have to sort of go out and deal with contractors. But we're currently out of framework with our previous contractor, so we will have to complete a rather large procurement exercise if we go through with the next phase of PSDS. So then that's obviously another whole thing, is to go out to procure a design that one contractor's done, to try and ensure fairness throughout that procurement process. So I'd say for me, it's the technical expertise that is the biggest sort of barrier in terms of viability. You know, I've got a list as long as my arm of buildings that could be suitable for it. It's just getting it from sort of outline business case all the way through design, through procurement, is very challenging.
Right, excellent. And we are now facing the last few minutes, so I'm going to rattle out a couple of quick fire ones. So Ryan, I've just got a couple for you. Callum Stewart, right at the bottom, is asking, do you see heat pumps becoming economical given the upfront costs? So I'm asking you a question about capital cost up front. So if you hold that one, so there's a question about capital cost up front, and there was one in the middle. I'm scrolling away here. Yeah, Derek Beer, what percentage of heat pumps meet their design criteria? So Ryan, two quick fire ones. One, how's it going to get economical given the upfront cost? Two, do they meet their design criteria?
So yeah, cool. Upfront cost, supply and demand, basically. As we see growth in the market, we're seeing a reduction in the market of fossil fuel heating systems. So many of these, you know, well-known manufacturers who have done boilers, etc., commercial boilers, are progressively moving into the low carbon space. That creates more competition, that brings down cost, more kind of purchasing options become available. We don't necessarily have to look at buying heat pumps outright. There are finance options. There are options to use, you know, look at providing heat pumps as part of an energy package. So it can be heat as a service or heat as a solution, rather than the upfront capital cost. So it can be a packaged or managed financial package product. So that's, you know, one of the ways in which costs are going to come down, as well as various other kind of economical metrics. And the kind of performance gap is such a big thing. I would say if it's specified correctly and installed correctly, then there shouldn't be a performance gap between how it's designed and how it's operating. But the data is always key. So the best thing we can do is make sure there's sufficient controls on site and an FM team or a building management kind of person or company who are reporting and measuring their service. Manufacturers such as ourselves do have our own kind of reporting metrics, so you can pay us, you know, something like 100 quid a month or something ridiculous, as in, like, it's not very much money at all, I don't mean, sorry, like £100 a month or something, and we monitor like the usage of our systems. We can highlight if there's areas in which we think they're being inefficiently used and advise on what kind of technological things can be adjusted. And sometimes it's as simple as someone's left a window open and you can just put a contact sensor in, so the window opens, the unit turns off, etc., etc. But yeah, data is key.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks for those very fast answers. And I'm going to, if I could ask actually Ryan and Tim, if you've got a minute to type any other comments into any of the questions that you could add to, or you don't think we've covered yet, because I'm just going to give Hannah a chance. When we passed around the rose-tinted spectacles, Hannah, you missed out on the fun bit where you got to smile and say things were going to be great. So last word to you. So I would have asked you earlier, future gazing, fast forward 5 or 10 years, imagine things have gone terrifically well and you've got that support and you've overcome those funding obstacles. Just paint us a rosy picture of what it could look like, success for retrofit heat pumps across Northumberland. So just give us that future vision for a minute there, please.
Yeah, I think for us, and particularly sort of moving into doing more schools with ground source heat pump, it's very much just starting from the bottom up in terms of climate education, energy awareness. There's already quite a good network of, they call them sort of like energy champions in schools, sort of like school councils, but for climate. And just sort of building that across. Obviously, we've talked about behaviour change quite a bit on this, and that's sort of one of the biggest areas. So not just in commercial buildings with schools and so on. Children will then take that home, talk to their parents, talk about domestic options, retrofit. Obviously, the government's put schemes out for domestic heat pumps. So it's that sort of like bottom-up change, us communicating that as a county council across the whole area, and supporting parish councils to do their own decarbonisation of heat as well, supporting other businesses to do so. We're waiting on at the minute sort of more energy efficiency funding for heat decarbonisation plans. I think that will really help us sort of be leaders within our county, as well as sort of leading people along with us.
Excellent, thanks. So some positive notes to end on. It's a tough topic, and I really appreciate your candour, all the panelists, and the honesty and the frankness about how challenging some of it is. But a nice note to finish on. potential bottom-up, community by community, county-wide, get that sense of sea change happening. So there we go. Just back in time there, Tim. So for me to thank you. So a big thank you to all our panelists, Ryan, Hannah and Tim. To yourselves out there, loads of questions. And I'm sorry if we didn't get to them all. By all means, type anything else in the last few seconds remaining. Reminder to check out elementaldigital.co.uk. Online community for professionals focused on innovation, heat, water, air and energy, vital elements within the built environment. Now and in the future, full diary of events on the website, upcoming webinars. Don't forget that one coming up on Thursday, same time, 11 a.m. But that for the moment, then that's it. A big thank you to the panel. Lots of discussion, lots of questions and answering. Great work from the three of you. Thank you for your time. I've been Jim McClelland, editor at SUSMeme. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.